Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Access2 Tips. We're going to do an import this time and a couple of queries. So just adding on what you learned last time. Just follow the instructions through. I'll point out some different areas and we'll see if we can get this done in 10 or 12 minutes. First thing the author asks you to do is create a new table in Datasheet View using the name donations. And so creating a table in Datasheet View, and I wouldn't necessarily worry about naming it really quick yet. Let me show you something. He says switch to Design View and then change ID to Donation ID. When you click this, it's going to ask you to name it, and now you can name it Donations. That's how I do it, and that makes it a lot easier. He said change the ID to Donation ID. And then add the following field names: donor ID, and I'm not going to go through and do that for you. Plant ID, donation date, donation amount in that order. We're going to change some data types over here, so you'll have some more fields on this. We changed the data type for the donor ID and plant ID fields. Donor ID to a number, and then you'll change the data type for the donation date. Then you'll to date, time, and then change the data type for the donation amount field to currency. So the other fields you're just going to go through and change some data types for this. Ask us to view this in data, and anytime you change back and forth, you're going to have to save this. So you change this back, and typically when you change back, you're going to be asked to enter some data to the records to the data fields. So the donor ID, plant ID, I think the first one's 24. The second one is, let's see, donation ID, plant ID, donation date, 24, and then we'll keep moving through. Just follow through step number 4 and see. Then you sort the records. You've seen sorting already. The excuse me. The next thing, we're going to import some data. So go to external data. The data type you can import through this. You can actually use any one of these. There's nothing fancy about these labels right here. But what this does for you is when it says, when you know you're going to import a spreadsheet or an Excel workbook, then click Excel. And then I've got this set up for desktop and this set up for this down here. So and then we'll just kind of pause there for a second and read this carefully. So we're importing the plants XLSX as a new table in the current database. And the smart thing to do is read this completely before you do anything else. Using the wizard, specify that the first row contains column headings, set the plant field ID to be indexed with no duplicates, and set the plant ID field as the primary key. Import the table with the name plants. Do not save the steps. So we're using the entire table to bring this in. This could have been an append a copy of this. You could have taken the records, the rows in a spreadsheet, and you could have imported those in as records. But we weren't told to append it. We were told to download the entire workbook as a new table. So we can do this. Click OK. And now we read the instructions, and I like to read them again. The first row contains column headings in worksheet, and this looks correct here. And first row contains column headings. That is default checked, which is good. Set the plant ID field to be indexed. So we'll click here, set the plant ID field name to be indexed, and let's see, with no duplicates. And so this, and set the plant ID field as the primary key. Okay, we'll show you that in just a second. I'm looking for data type to see if it has a data type that we bring in. And bring this. It will use a default here. We want to set this forth as the plant ID as the primary key. That's very common. Notice the difference. What happens? You delete this field when you bring this in. So that ID here, and import to table, and here's where you give it a name. It's defaulted to this, and then you can click finished, and then the author says do not check save import steps. So you click close, and you don't see it yet, but you just brought it in here. Use the plants table in design view and change the field size. So plants here, you can right click and go to design view. He asks us to change the field size on the plant ID field to long integer. Change the field size for plant ID field to integer, and so we can long integer, and you can click here and do long integer. Then the author asks us to click yes in the dialog box indicating that some data may be lost, and then save the table. We'll do that, and this is very common, and you click yes, and he says then close the table, and we've done that. We don't need this one open either. Now, the next thing we're going to do is relationships, and if you've been reading along in your text, you understand that database tools, a database contains multiple tables. As you've seen, you've got 3 tables right here. We have to relate these tables. Now, I've not put any fields and stuff in a table based on time, and so what you have to do now is look at this, and this will make a lot more sense. If we do relationships, then we can show the tables. I like to add the donations, the donor, and the plant table in here. And so we can close this down. And so what the authors ask us to do is relate these 3 tables together. Now, you may think, well, the easiest thing to do is relate the top 3 fields together, and that won't always work. And in some cases it does, but in this case, we'll go with what the author says to do. He says begin establishing relationships in the database by adding the donations, donors, and plants tables to the relationships window. We've done that. Close the show table dialog box. I've done that. Create a one-to-many relationship between the donor ID field in the donors table and the donor ID field in the donations table. So he said from the donors to donations. So what I'm going to do is move this around, and you'll see why in a little bit. I'm going to move this around, and I'm going to create a relationship between the donor ID field in the donors table and the donor ID field over here, and I will bring this over and drop it. He says enforce referential integrity, and he also says to cascade update the related fields. So we'll do this and click create. Now, if you notice when we've done that, we've related these 2 tables together. We have a one donor ID to many donor IDs and donations. So I hope you can understand that you have multiple donors giving one donor right here providing, and there's many donors and donations over here. Then the author says, so we've done that and it looks okay, no errors. Author says then create a one-to-many relationships between the plant ID field in the plants table and the plant ID over here. Well, you don't have a plant ID over in the donations table, and so and I'm sure if I go back and do the instructions, one of these would be to enter a plant ID in the donations. I didn't do that, but typically you'll enter a field and you'll bring that down and drag this down. That'll create your other relationship. And so because I don't have that right now, I'm not able to create this. So that, you'll have that. I just looked up at the instructions and read that, and we're supposed to put a plant ID field over here in this table. So that you'd bring that over and drop it and drag it, and then do the same thing as you did over here, and you'll have a one-to-many relationships over here. So that's all. Excuse me. That all works well, and so we'll save what we're working on and close this down. The next thing we do is called a query, and a query is asking a question. We're going to create a query using the Simple Query Wizard. And I'll show you in a minute where that is. From the donations table, so create, and we'll do a query wizard. And author said do a simple query wizard. And he said from the donations table, add the donor ID and donation amount field. Okay, so you can go donations table, and we don't have these up here. I'm going to pick another query up here. I'll pick a donors table, and I'll add the first name, last name, and address. And so the three right here that I will do is click next, and we'll give this a title, and we'll click finish. And here's our query. This is our query, and it works well. We just ran the query, and you can run queries like this, and there's other ways to run it. We'll do something else in a minute. We're going to do some other stuff in just a minute. So this is our query, and then you can save this right here and do everything. Now let's go back and create another query. I'm going to try to get a query that I can make some changes to this too. Now there's other ways to get a query. This was a simple query. If we went back into the design here and click this view, here's your query. Now this is the same thing as you had over here. Same query as you had over here. You're just looking at things a little bit different. I just want to point some areas out for you right now. If you were changing this around, if you were going back and you were looking for, let's see if we have any similar names. Yeah, we have first names of Jim. So if we go back to the design view, and if we're looking for all of the Jims and the first name, we can go equal, excuse me, we could, I'm back in spreadsheet. We can do, and you can put quotes up here, or you can just type Jim, but watch what happens if you click someplace else. So you have Jim up here. And now, what I've asked for all the first names of Jim to be in this query. Let's run it, and there's my Jims. And that's what's cool about a query. You can take this out, and of course you have your query back, and then I can run it again, and this time the whole thing will be back, just like that right there. So that's a query that you're doing. You can also, let's add some more stuff in here to this, just so you can, there's not a whole lot in here, and I didn't fill out a lot of other stuff. But now if I had any amounts over here, you can put the numbers, and you can query. You can also, we'll get into some fancier queries. You can also query for or amounts or and amounts, and we will do that in future ones of these right now. So that's the querying for you right now. And you can also change this back. Let's see, let's go back here. I can also add another query. Let's go back here, and we can do another query. We can create, and let's do query wizard, and let's do another simple query right now, and we can do plants, and plant name, plant on hand, and plant ID, and next, and finish. And these are the plants on hand and the plant ID. Now again, let's take a look at this, and let's go back and look at our plants on hand and plant ID. And if I was looking at something to see how many plants I had on hand, I may want to say, well, I want to know which plants I have on hand that are greater than 5. And so if you notice this right here, and I click run, and I have these numbers are greater than 5. You can also have two fields. You can say the ones that are greater than 5, and then over here, or equal to or greater than 10, and then run the query. And of course, it should be greater than or equal to 10. And so I run this, and then I have this. This is equal to or greater than 10, or it's this over here. So just looking at different queries, and you can come back and you can clear your criteria, clear our criteria, and then you can run it, and then you have everything back of what we were doing. So that's a little bit of querying. This is new, and play with this a little bit and do these exercises, and you shouldn't have any trouble. Good day.